Welcome to the Geneva Press Club online for this panel about the rebound of multilateralism as a result of Joe Biden's election and its impact on the international Geneva. Welcome to those who participate to this session here on Zoom, and to all of those who follow the live stream on our website, www.pressclub.ch, on our YouTube channel or on Facebook Live. And a special thanks to our eminent panelists who I will present in a few seconds. The change was stunning, faster than many could imagine. Without waiting, almost as soon as he was elected, President Joe Biden announced the United States will reintegrate the Human Rights Council in Geneva, stay in the World Health Organization, and therefore pay its contribution, move forward with the nomination of the Nigerian candidate to the head of the WTO, and reintegrate the Paris Climate Agreement. It seems really that one president can make the difference. But is this really meaning a deep and long-term change in favor of multilateralism? What can we expect for the international organizations based in Geneva? And more generally, are those times of economic divisions, but also, at least to a certain extent, of sanitary political divisions, are those times really favoring a stronger cooperation between nations? These are some of the questions we have the pleasure to discuss today with our speakers, very eminent figures of the international Geneva and far beyond. Let me present them shortly to our assistants. First, Marie-Laure Salles. Marie-Laure Salles, you are the new director of the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies here in Geneva. You started in September 2020. Without going into your very rich academic career, I will just mention that before joining the Institute, you were Dean of the School of Management and Innovation of Sciences Po Paris, a school you launched in 2016, and that you also studied at Harvard University, where you got your PhD. Mr. Marc Cassayre, you are the Deputy Head of the United States Mission to the United Nations in Geneva. You are also the Chargé d'affaires, as we say in French and in English, I guess. Marc Cassayre, you are a career member of the Senior Foreign Service. You serve as Chargé d'affaires, as I said, since August 2018 in this job. Before that, you were in charge in Washington, D.C. as director of the Office of Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs in the Bureau of International Organizations. And I don't want to go into the details of a previous sentence, but just to say that you had important positions in different US embassies. Last element of your bio that we can't miss here, you have a master's degree of the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, which probably explains also your excellent French. We won't profit about it because we are speaking in English. Now, Mr. Walter Stevens, you are the ambassador, head of the delegation of the European Union to the United Nations in Geneva. You took your position at almost the same time than Mr. Cassayre in September 2018. Previously, you served as chair of the EU Political and Security Committee in Brussels. As a Belgian citizen, you also served your government in different positions as diplomatic advisor, for example. As a diplomat and ambassador, you were in position in the Belgian embassy in Washington, D.C., and for sure in many other places. And now we go to Didier Chambovey, Ambassador Chambovey. You are the head of the Swiss mission to the WTO and EFTA in Geneva. And with no doubt, you have the longest experience of international organizations here in Geneva, as you entered the GATT, the predecessor of WTO, in 1987. And since then, you were involved in about all negotiations on trade in different instances for the Swiss government. So thank you to all of you to be with us today, and let's directly go to the first part of our discussion. What was the election of Joe Biden? The election of Joe Biden changed in perspective of multilateralism in Geneva? And I will turn myself to Marc Cassayre from Chargé d'Affaires of the US mission. Perhaps a somewhat personal question to start, if I may, Mr. Cassayre. How, as a deputy head of the US mission and as Chargé d'Affaires, did you live this very radical change from the Trump administration to the Biden administration? How did you adapt to this new situation? And I give you the mic.
Thank you very much. Just trying to unmute there. Apologize for the delay.
Sorry.
Well, first, Mr. Ruetschi, thank you so much to you and to the Club Suisse Presse for having us today. This is a great opportunity to talk about the multilateral Geneva. There's so much that we do here, and it's a very important center for all these discussions. And so it's a very great opportunity. So thank you so much for that. And I'm pleased to be on a panel with such excellent colleagues here. To answer your question, you know, I'm a career foreign service officer, and that is a public servant. We take these jobs knowing that there will be changes in administrations, and I served under many administrations of both Republican and Democrat. And so with those changes sometimes do come alterations in policy or changes and shifts. And so personally, I think I was telling you before we joined this, I was here a little over 10 years ago. So I was here in the transition from in 2012 years ago from the Bush to the Obama administration. And so what it is essentially is there is a time of adaptation where you do have to prepare new policy positions. And there's a lot of discussions with Washington to try and prepare the terrain so that we can respond quickly. But even as you'll probably hear from the conversation today, there are things that are not always ironed out over the first weeks, months. And so they take a little bit of time. But of course, you know, these are always exciting times. Change brings new opportunities. Change brings possibilities for, as we've seen in this circumstances here, a lot of re-engagement and continued engagement across the board, building partnerships and trying to find creative solutions. So it's an interesting time, and it's always a wonderful opportunity to be a diplomat, especially in Geneva, where there's so much to do.
Can I just follow up with a question, another question? What, in your view, is the most important decision of the new Biden administration with an impact for the organizations and the international life in Geneva? Is there one or two that you would select?
Yeah, well, if you want to focus specifically on Geneva, I think the two that have the most resounding impact and immediate impact are the ones you've already mentioned. So you have the reaffirming our commitment and engagement with the World Health Organization. That's something that comes along with, comes at a time of enormous international attention to the response to the COVID pandemic. We have committed to funding the COVAX facility to the tune of about $4 billion to provide the ability for developing world in particular to procure vaccines. So these are things that I think have a very large impact, not just on a financial level, but also on a policy level of the organization. And the second one is the Human Rights Council, because we were not engaged with the Human Rights Council until the new administration took office. And that, once again, provides a real opportunity for us to engage in the important work of the Council. And even though we have our disagreements with some of the focus of the Council and some of the membership issues, I'm sure we could talk about later, being at the table really is critically important. I do think having the voice of the United States matters, and that's, I think, something you'll see that will have an effect across the board here in Geneva.
Thank you. I see that there are already one or two hands up. Just to mention that we will take the question at the end of the panel later on. I'm sure everybody will be able to ask its question. I turn myself to Ambassador Stevens and just like to have a little bit your perspective about what happened in the last years and how did the EU live those last years with the low level involvement of the United States, Human Rights Council without the United States? Does it really make a change?
First of all, thank you, and I hope you hear me clearly.
Absolutely.
Thank you again also for this opportunity to exchange views with such an eminent panel and also on such an important topic. But let me answer your question straight away. Yes, it makes quite a change. And I must admit that indeed that during the previous administration, the withdrawal from the United States from the multilateral system has created a void. And like in physics, I mean, voids tend to be filled. And we have seen, of course, other powers, not in the least China, trying to fill this void. We've seen also that many countries are looking towards the European Union, and we've taken up that role to the European Union because they see us as a sort of a solid, reliable partner, steady partner, also as a very strong defender, very strong promoter of the multilateral system. And we have taken on that role by introducing, for example, in the Human Rights Council, quite a few topics, like now, for example, again, on Myanmar, a special session that we have taken initiative on. We have done before also on the freedom of religion and belief, but before also with the countries of the OIC, also on Myanmar to set up an accountability mechanism. On the WHO, the very important health issue, we've taken the initiative to launch a resolution for the strengthening of the preparedness and response to the pandemic. That was in last year, and now again, where finally we found a consensus among all the member states, and everybody really loved that. But I must admit that we're very happy, and it has been said in Brussels, it has been said in Washington, it has been said here, that the US is back. I mean, there is this famous statement, since I will be back. Well, we're glad that the United States is back. And I'm going to say that we have already had a very productive meeting with my colleague Mark Cassayre and our 27 ambassadors. We have every week an ambassadors meeting where we went through all the fields where we could work more closely together on the Human Rights Council, on the WHO, on environment also. And by the way, our High Representative, Mr. Borrell, and our Commission have developed an agenda for an EU-US cooperation for global change that has 4 pillars. One is on the green aspects, the green leadership. The second is on the health issues and the COVID response. The third is on trade and technology. And the last one is on global action and security. These are 4 fields where we think that there is a need for a very strong EU-US leadership. And I think we need that in the international system, because indeed that system needs to deliver, needs to give the answers to the population that are really in demand for answers, but also needs to be sure that the values are preserved that are at the core of the system.
But if I understand, if I may follow up on this, you had more space in a certain way when the US were not so much involved in the last 4 years. So won't you regret this space to take your initiative, to be the one with whom the other countries have to discuss and be a little bit in the shadow, perhaps, of the United States?
I don't think that, and it was also clear from the meeting that we had with Mark and the ambassadors, I don't think it would put us in the shadow or the US in the shadow. I think we have to build on its other strengths. I think if we, and that's also one of the goals, the priorities in the European Union, is to build up its own strength, its own autonomy, because we can only be an interesting partner also for the United States when we have indeed this autonomy and this strength also on which we can further build. So basically, we can build on each other's strength and team up together in order to defend better all the values and the interests that we all share. And of course, there will be things where we don't see eye to eye, there will be differences. But for that, we can talk, and we can also see how we can move forward. And we've seen a lot of change in the American position on difficult subjects, such as the sexual and reproductive health and rights, the issues of LGBTIQ. So we look very much forward to this conversation and to this cooperation and to this partnership that I think can only be in the benefit of the whole multilateral system.
Thank you. Mr. Chambovey, Ambassador Chambovey, I would say it looks almost like a miracle. The WTO had no director for months. The nomination process was blocked, and 3 weeks ago, all of a sudden, the candidate supported by the vast majority of WTO members was finally nominated. Can you explain us what really happened? And can one country alone, in this case the United States, decide of the fate of an organization like WTO?
Thank you very much. I mean, an interesting question, in particular in the way you're putting it. Now, let me say at the outset that the United States has always played an extremely important role in the context of the multilateral trade cooperation. You may remember that at the end of the Second World War, the United States had played a crucial role in establishing the new economic order, among which the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trades, that became the WTO in '95. And something is clear at the WTO. I mean, the US leadership is absolutely decisive. You will never be able to complete a multilateral negotiation without strong US leadership. I would not say that this is a sufficient condition, but it is a necessary condition. Now, just to revert to the question that you asked, I mean, I would like to recap that consultations have been carried out to determine among the different candidates that put forward their candidacy should lead the WTO. There's been a selection committee, they have consulted all the members, and as you mentioned, at the end, they came to the conclusion that Dr. Ngozi Okonjo was enjoying by far the broadest possible support. But of course, the decision to appoint, as many other decisions at WTO, to appoint a Director General has to be made on the basis of a consensus. And at the time, in June last year, the US opposed the consensus that emerged on, it was in September, that emerged on Dr. Ngozi. The new administration has been acting very quickly on that score. And they lifted the US opposition that has, of course, been decisive because perhaps other members who would have supported other candidates fell in line very quickly. And Dr. Ngozi was appointed as the Director General of the WTO. And of course, it is an important position. A Director General cannot do a miracle. Not only in the context of the WTO, but also in the context of the other organization. But the Director General has an extremely important role to play in bringing together the member states, in putting forward compromise solution, in taking initiative. And I'm sure that with Dr. Okonjo, we have the right person, the right personality. We have a dynamic leader and a leader that is already taking initiative to the benefit of the system and to the benefit of the organization.
Thank you. Madame Marie-Laure Salles, the Graduate Institute is right in the middle of these organizations, at least on a geographical point of view. And at the same time, you have an academic distance. Were you surprised of the speed of the decisions of the US administration? And what does it tell about stability or instability of the international organization system? Just to wrap up a little bit and put in perspective these changes. Can you do that? And I give you the mic. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ruetschi, for having me on this panel. And yes, I think that the title of the panel of today, New Breath for Multilateralism, is very much what we felt. I think that we were holding our breath for the last few months, and the end of January has been has opened a new breathing space, a new space for hope. I think that's very clear. And so that's the very positive side. And I think that the series of very quick decisions have been, partaking of this and have been very important to give this strong signal. I think on the other hand, probably in the context of multilateralism, the notion that we are not going to go back to the world of before is particularly apt. And so I think that we should be very much on our toes collectively, and in the sense of interdependency that really comes out already from the discussions that we've started really here on trying to anticipate, in a sense, a redefinition of multilateralism, taking really opportunity of this breathing space, of this new life that is being breathed into multilateralism, to actually redefine it even before we are put in front of another set of obstacles, because we are likely to have other sets of obstacles ahead. So I think taking the opportunity for a new form of leadership here, collective leadership, to take the issues that were there before and actually try to solve them would be, for me, the next step. We cannot just breathe and be happy about it.
Thank you. Marc Cassayre, I'd like to come back on human rights with you, and let's take two very vivid and today's strong example: the oppression of military forces in Myanmar and the situation in Eritrea. On these two topics, what can the United States bring, and will the Human Rights Council be able really to change something? What's the power of the Human Rights Council, and therefore also the power of the United States in this question?
Thank you. So as far as maybe start with the power of the Council, I think that the value of the Council is that you have an ability of the international community to come together and speak with a strong voice on the most concerning human rights situations around the world. And you've mentioned two, for example, and actually one of the first acts that we did as a new participant in the Council was to engage on the discussion in the special session that Walter mentioned about the situation in Myanmar. And while I think the world would like to see the Council snap its fingers and improve a situation, I think those of us who work day in and day out on these issues, we recognize that it takes time. But that international pressure and that international condemnation does matter. There are human rights defenders that count on the Council. There are activists around the world that count on the Council to raise issues and raise attention to their concerns and the day-to-day struggles that they face to secure their own human rights. And so when it comes to a situation such as Myanmar, we saw that over time, historically, the international pressure was important in promoting change that led to their democratic transition. Now, unfortunately, they have significantly backtracked on that. And of course, we're extremely concerned with the situation there. But this international pressure and this collective voice is essential. You asked, about the situation in Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Ethiopia, northern Ethiopia, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, this is one of many issues that are taking place in the world that deserve attention. And when I mentioned that we have concerns about how the Council is functioning, there are situations around the world that have not been addressed, and that we hope as a participant in the Council, and we've actually seeking membership in the Council, and hopefully we'll be elected so that we could start our membership term next year, is to be able to bring to the table our diplomatic energy and our diplomatic outreach to be able to ensure that the Council is able to take up some of these tough issues. It's a crowded agenda. When you see that Walter mentioned a number of the issues in front of the Council already, and every country is trying to bring forward issues, but I think these are the types of things that have to be brought forward. I think we've talked about how the Council has not had a strong voice on the situation in Xinjiang in China, or in Hong Kong, or looking at some of the abuses that have happened in Iran over time. So there are a lot of things that the Council can do more, and we do intend to use our diplomatic abilities to try and make sure that the Council can address those circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Same question for you, Ambassador Stevens. Are sanctions a solution to put pressure on those countries? What are the means that the Human Rights Council has to make the things change? And do you use really all the means? Is it possible to use them in this commission, in this council?
Yeah, again, it's part of the element that Mark already mentioned, the power of the council and what you can do. But of course, I mean, one thing that I want first of all to stress is that the council continues working. If you compare it to the Security Council, because many of the issues are also linked to security issues, Security Council is basically blocked by the great powers, while the Human Rights Council continues to function. I mean, we have had this special session on Myanmar. It's only part of itself. It is not the solution, but it's part of a whole process of sanctions, of speaking out, of giving hope to the people. And this morning, by the way, we have had a meeting with Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya, the leader of the opposition in Belarus, because we are also introducing, we have asked last session an urgent debate on Belarus. We have introduced a resolution that was finally adopted against all opposition by Russia and others, against, well, many countries, that set in motion a monitoring mechanism by the High Commissioner's Office, who had to report by the end of the year and again now. Now we go for an even stronger resolution. We still have to see if it can be adopted, but we have a good hope that it can, for setting up an accountability mechanism, because, I mean, all these atrocities, brutalities, arrests against peaceful demonstrators that are happening there in Belarus, the lack of an inclusive dialogue with the opposition is really mind-boggling. And so if we make sure that the information about all these atrocities are being preserved, so that people feel that at one point they can come to a court, that might be an element of pressure. Combine this with also the sanctions that the European Union and others and the United States have put on some of the leaders, both selective. And we heard this morning from Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya that this seemed to have an effect on the leaders. As Mark said, it's not something that is going to happen tomorrow, but it's all getting together. It's part of a wider approach that indeed pushes the things into the right direction. So yes, I think we need the Human Rights Council. We need the Human Rights Council to be speaking out, to take measures, to do inquiries. It's not easy because indeed you have 47 members and you need the necessary support, but that is also why we need to work with others to sometimes make a little bit of a compromise or try to convince others to do certain things that are necessary in certain countries that are very far from them. For example, convince Latin Americans or Africans that it's indeed necessary to do something on Belarus. But that is actually exactly what we try to do. And we very much believe that speaking out gives hope to the people, but also put pressure on the leaders that do not respect human rights, and can be indeed very useful as part of a wider approach.
Just to take one more second to human rights, Mr. Cassayre, are you also ready, the United States, to put yourself in question about questions that are raised also in this council, question of race or other things? What does it mean for you to be now again inside of this and exposed to critique also?
Thanks for that. It's very much at the center of our approach. I think you've heard from the Secretary of State. It's made very clear. I've made it statements as well here in Geneva. You know, we take our role very seriously as a member of the human rights community and as a participant in the Human Rights Council of engaging in self-reflection. You know, we look at this with a degree of humility. We recognize that there are very serious challenges we face domestically, dealing with racism. And this is something the Biden administration has put front and center on the agenda to make sure that we domestically can address the real genuine challenges we have with discrimination in the United States. But we also bring that conversation here to Geneva. Most recently, we've partnered with the African group and many other countries around the council. We're going to have a joint statement on racism. And that's something that it's taking a sort of a fresh look at how we can address these issues collectively. And it's something I hope others would see as an example. Unfortunately, we have seen a number of countries here in Geneva that unfortunately have sought membership in the council simply to shield themselves from criticism, or to use the council as a way to introduce concepts of human rights that really, frankly, undermine the whole nature of human rights. And we've seen what China's tried to do with the mutually beneficial cooperation resolution, which essentially seeks to flip human rights on its head, make it a discussion among states, and only if that conversation is comfortable among member states, and leave the poor people to suffer. That's not what this whole international human rights framework was established on, and we need to be there to defend that. And we need to make sure that the Human Rights Council is defending those rights of individuals, and that member states are upholding and protecting those rights of people living in their countries. And we do hope that self-reflection, that openness, the humility, and also our real desire to listen. We want to listen and to hear what other delegations have to say. There are a lot of real serious concerns that many countries in the developing world have raised, and we're listening closely. We're listening closely on questions of environment, climate, and the whole range of development, even economic, social, and culture rights issues, so that we can try to understand where we can come together, build those partnerships and coalitions to then address the real serious concerns and hopefully improve the work of the Council so it does indeed become a place for self-reflection and openness for all countries.
Thank you. Ambassador Chambovey, if I may, we're going to talk again about WTO. It has now a director. As you said, director doesn't make all the difference and has a certain latitude to operate, but for sure can't make miracles too. At the same time, one thing that is blocking many times the situation at WTO is the sanctions. We were talking about sanctions before, sanctions of United States against China. So in these conditions, can really WTO make a better job finding common ground as long as sanctions are on?
Thank you. This is clearly a sensitive issue because, as you know, there are a number of tariffs that have been imposed over the last 4 years by the United States, but also in retaliation to the US tariffs by other member states. This is not a satisfactory solution, clearly, and we hope that solution will be found. There are discussions going on in the United States on these tariffs. It's not only tariffs that are targeting exports from China, but sometimes are targeting exports from countries from the European Union, including Switzerland, for instance. We're not a member of the European Union, but some of our products are being targeted by these tariffs, and there are a number of disputes underway. Probably the best way to sort out all these would be to find mutually agreeable solution, acceptable solution. So we also have to understand that the new US administration will not be able to define the details of its trade policy in a fortnight. This will take some time, but we are hopeful that a mutually agreeable solution will be found in a more constructive spirit. And there are some encouraging examples. For instance, the US and the European Union last Friday agreed on a 4-month suspension of all tariffs imposed in the WTO disputes in connection with the Airbus-Boeing case. You know, this is one of the biggest cases we had at WTO. And both partners committed to work towards a permanent resolution. That is to negotiate a mutually agreeable solution. And this appeasement is very much welcome and is also in line with the spirit of the WTO, that problems are resolved primarily through negotiation and that trade sanctions are only a last resort. So we can see this as a step in the right direction, trying to find out mutually agreeable solution with other partners. This is one thing. This being said, the WTO is not only about a dispute settlement, about imposing sanctions. This is also about developing an agenda on other areas. And we have, for instance, a negotiation, multilateral negotiation that's going on fisheries subsidies. It is an important negotiation because it is more or less the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals 14.6, to eliminate subsidies that are conducing to the exhaustion of natural resources, and in particular here, the exhaustion to depleting the fish stocks. And subsidies in an instrument that is being administered at international level by the WTO. And in these negotiations, clearly, the United States is playing an important role, and the United States have a high stake and has also an ambitious objective. It's not an easy negotiation, it's certainly a matter of priority, and I'm sure that whatever happens in the area of sanctions or dispute settlement, we should be able to find a mutually agreement, to find an agreement on this issue of fisheries. Another issue also, which is emerging in the context of the WTO, this is the discussion on trade and sustainability and environmental sustainability. And here again, last Friday, the US sent a positive message regarding the plurilateral talks on trade and environmental sustainability. This is a process that was launched last November by about 50 WTO members. The US did not join the initiative last year, but even if it has not formally joined this initiative under the new administration, the US has pledged last Friday to participate in the talks. So, and we will certainly badly need the participation of the US in order to advance this issue.
Thank you. Marie-Laure, to wrap up this first part of the discussion, would you say that the US power today is growing or more diminishing compared to the last 20 years? And in which areas is it really important that the US are there? I gave you the mic, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was muted still. Thank you very much for this question. If I may, before going to this question, I think I would like to underscore, and going back to the last point on trade and sustainability, sure, that actually one of the angles in which multilateralism may be able to reinvent itself is by realizing the importance actually of dynamics that are happening more at the crossroads between civil society, consumers, investors and economic producers. And I think that it's true for the environment. We've seen that a mix of transformations in all those categories of stakeholders is really pushing for finance for climate change, the integration of environmental issues in our consumption decisions, but also in the production and the global value chains of a lot of companies. And all this is obviously facilitating the work of international organizations. So if we think about the next frontier of this being also human rights and the social issues, I think that if we are also working in close interconnections with those different groups of actors, it will facilitate in time the work of the Human Rights Council. So we have to see it also as a very interdependent mix of process. So going back to your question, and to the role of the US, I think it's maybe not, the way to put it is maybe not in the sense of has the US lost in power, etc. The reality is clearly that we have entered a more binary kind of big power world in the last few years. That's quite clear, and I guess we're all very aware of that. The other question, and that's really
when you say binary, you mean US?
China, US, obviously, that this is something that we haven't had for quite some time. And the other dimension, and this would be, I would be very interested to hear actually Mark on that, is that obviously the US has a lot of internal issues and will have to face a lot of internal issues connected to the pandemic, connected to social issues, race issues, the economy, etc., etc. So how much of this is going to be the focus of the attention of the Biden administration versus its capacity to really be a very strong actor on the multilateral scene? I think this is really a question. I mean, I don't think anybody has the answer to that, but I think it's a fair question because probably the US is now in a stage where it has to take care of itself very, very clearly for quite a number of months and years probably ahead.
Thank you very much. So let's perhaps jump to the second part of our discussion, which is focused on today's news issues like COVID, like Brexit, and their impact on multilateralism. And I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Stevens, and talk a little bit about health organization, WHO, Gavi, COVAX insisted, as many governments, to implement an equitable distribution of the vaccine between North and South. But at the end, it wasn't so equitable, and it's even between European countries, it provoked many tensions. So this is the most global issue you can imagine, and we see that it's treated not very multilaterally treated. What's the problem here, Ambassador Stevens?
Yeah, first of all, I think you're right. I mean, let me say it's not, of course, an easy issue, because it's always the same thing. People want easy answers and easy solutions to sometimes very complex problems. And let me say that, first of all, the incredible speed with which this vaccine has been developed is just incredible. And we as European Union have invested enormously in this, both in the research, in the development of medicines and in this vaccine. We spent more than 12 billion euros in setting up the AXA accelerator that brings together all the companies, but also the organizations. So there we have had a success. That's for sure. And we invested indeed also in a lot of companies like AstraZeneca. Secondly, we thought also everybody can only be safe when everybody's safe. So we need also to help those countries that have a difficulty of getting the vaccines and medicine, that have a poor medical system. So that's why
that's the speech. I mean, everybody says it, but nobody does it.
I wouldn't say that nobody does it, but because we have invested in COVAX, and now it starts to roll out, and there is a little bit of sort of a misunderstanding, because some of the African countries think that in Europe everybody is vaccinated. It's not the case. In Belgium, it's only 5%. But the whole issue is we invested in these things, but then people expect a quick answer, and that answer is sometimes not coming. Why? Because some of these companies need indeed to develop their production capacity. They cannot deliver. There has been also, of course, some company policy, and I think there we have an interest amongst all of us, and our leaders have said that also, to speak with these companies and maybe put pressure. That's also why the European Union has taken this measure on export control, which is not an export control to control exports to developing countries. It is just a measure of putting companies under pressure to make sure that they deliver what we have agreed. So yes, it is not, let's say, a sort of a clear-cut and quick approach on the multilateral front, but on the longer term, it certainly is, because now we see that COVAX seems to start working, that the rollout of vaccines is happening, some countries quicker than others. We could be a bit more efficient, I think, maybe also in Europe, although it's linked to many aspects also. So there is a collaborative approach, but of course, people want to see quicker results than sometimes can be delivered. So there is the issue also of the multilateral system that has to deliver also answers to people. And that's sometimes a bit complicated, because people want easy answers to complex issues, as I said in the beginning. And this is not always possible. So it leaves a lot of room for those who preach populism. And of course, slogans like, let's take back control, is much more popular than, we need a multilateral approach. While it's only the multilateral approach that finally seemed to work, and going alone is not necessarily always the answer. So I don't know if this is answering your question. So yes, there are certainly still defaults in the multilateral system. We could have done better, but it's always easy to say afterwards that we could have done better. But on the other hand, I think the way the vaccine has been developed, the way it is now rolled out, also in countries like Ghana, like Côte d'Ivoire, like Ethiopia, it's a matter of price also, because indeed companies have played this sort of policy also, that those that had agreements but did not pay so much got maybe a lesser service, if I may say so, than those who paid more. You have countries that have volunteered to be, let's say, an experiment, in the sense like in Israel, for example. I spoke to Israeli ambassador yesterday. They volunteered to make sure that all the data that are collected on the basis of vaccination are so they had a quicker rollout of the vaccine. But it's a global issue, and I think in the end, and Mr. Michel, our president of the council, said again, in the end, everybody understands that only a global solution can be a solution to the issue. So we have to work together. We are working together. It's not going as quick as we all expect and hope, but it is still working.
Marc Cassayre, so the USA are back into the funding of the WHO, and you are involved again in this. Your answer was very quick. You decided to invest in COVAX too. But does this mean that your critics of the previous administration about WTO, about the Director General, Are they just forgotten critics that it was the organization was submitted to China? Or how do you deal now with WHO? Will you still push for reforms, changes? And if yes, what are they?
Thank you. I think it's really important to note, as I said at the outset, that we immediately, it was the first full day, the second day here in Geneva. Next morning we had Dr. Fauci, who spoke at the World Health Organization and really recommitted the United States to a really close relationship with WHO, as remaining engaged in the organization. We have very long-standing ties with WHO, and we see the huge value of the organization. The world needs the WHO to function extremely well, as this pandemic has demonstrated, as the response to Ebola has demonstrated, as we have in many other instances. I think it is safe to say, though, that the response could have been better from all of us around the world, including WHO, with respect to the pandemic. And that's why countries, not just the United States, but all of us here in Geneva, are talking about how to reform and improve the WHO so that the organization can indeed respond to a future pandemic or a future global health crisis. There are a lot of discussions happening now about how that can be done. And so we're engaged in those conversations, whether it has to do with the health regulations or the ability of WHO to engage with countries, or the transparency and data sharing that will be required to ensure that everyone around the world knows as early as possible about potential health threats. And so those are conversations that are happening, and we're definitely engaged in those. I think you touched on a point, somewhat indirectly, with the relationship with China. I do think it is incredibly important. We're waiting very eagerly to see the results of the origins study that has been undertaken by the group of international experts, as well as with Chinese experts. I mean, I think we need to have full transparency. We need to know what data the teams are looking at to really understand what the origins were, so that we can prepare the world for the next pandemic, for the next kind of health threat. It's only a question of time. And so I think having that real transparency and data sharing is critical. I be frank with you, it's not something we have seen to date at the level we would like to see and expect. And so that's something that we'll be looking very eagerly to see that report come out. But it is one of many to build on. There's the International Panel for Pandemic Preparedness that's doing its research to determine how we can improve the organization. There's International Health Regulations Committee that's looking at how they can contribute ideas. So we as member states are going to work closely together to try and come up with a package. I know the EU has been working on the resolution to strengthen the WHO and its response capabilities, and we're pleased to be working on those together with others.
But would you say that the WHO is doing its job in question of transparency, or should they really improve all this data collecting, transparency with other countries? What's your thought?
Well, WHO has a role as an international organization to work with countries around the world to implement, to be the conduit for the implementation of the international health regulations. And in that, member states have signed on to share information in a specific timeline and to be fully transparent in doing so when you have these outbreaks. And as I said before, unfortunately, China we don't believe has demonstrated that same level of transparency and data sharing that would be necessary to give confidence to the world that we're on our track. Hopefully they will do that, and hopefully we will see some positive outcome from this origins study, and that we'll be able to move forward on a solid basis, knowing that we understand what happened and how we can fix it to make sure that when the next crisis comes around, the international community is ready to be prepared to respond. And we do believe that WHO is a critical component in doing that, and we're going to do everything we can to support the WHO to achieve those goals.
Ambassador Stevens, you wanted to react quickly?
Yeah, I wanted to support what Mark said on this. I mean, we're of course, nobody is perfect. It's clear that also the WHO has to act in a world where, for example, the national sovereignty is played out quite a lot. So when you have to share data, countries sometimes hide behind national sovereignty. And by the way, I mean, I see that also in other international organizations, that the polarization is increasing, that you see more and more countries hiding behind national sovereignty and not giving up power or access for international organizations such as WHO. But we have to continue working. If WHO would not exist, we have to invent it. So that's also why we have to strengthen it. That's also why we have introduced this resolution to further strengthen WHO, but as a part of response and preparedness for next pandemics, because they will come. And the point is that we have to have as many countries on board, because if you want to be to adopt something at the international organizations, you need the votes of a majority of member states. So you need to convince others, and also to convince others to make sure that, for example, data are shared. In that sense, I would like also to mention that the president of our council has made a proposal for a treaty on pandemics in order to make sure that the political commitment by leaders is taken up also, because of course health ministers and others and experts can do a lot, but if the political leaders are not committed to, for example, sharing data when there are certain signs of pandemic, then I think things will not happen. So that's also why we will continue pressing this.
Thank you. Ambassador Chambovey, the COVID-19 represents also, and the vaccine particularly represents also a economical challenge, and means also free trade license that will be given or not by WIPO, for example. How one has the impression that I mean not your organization, but the WTO is very little engaged in this question of trade, vaccine trade and stuff like that, and intellectual property. What are your thoughts about that? What should we improve that we got the better general access to these vaccines?
Mr. Ruetschi, I mean, there is a debate raging at WTO on those issues at the moment. It's been raging for quite some time. So we cannot say that we're not looking into this. It's really the top priority of the organization at present. There's a number of other issues. As you mentioned, as Ambassador Stevens mentioned, the name of the game now is scaling up production. So we have efficient vaccines. They've been developed in record time. And now we need to ramp up the production capacities in order to be able to vaccinate as many people around the world as possible. And there are different ways of doing this. First of all, it seems that the supply chains of the vaccine manufacturers is sometimes disrupted by bottlenecks in raw material. That can be very simple things, such as filters, such as bags, such as needle, such as lipids, etc. So, and clearly, I think the WTO has a role to play here to see to this that trade is flowing where it has to flow. And it's right. I mean, we could create transparency to perhaps get a better understanding of where the bottlenecks are, where we have supply, where we have stocks, and to secure that these products are flowing along the supply chain. This is important. So, and this will contribute to maximize the production effort. Then, of course, we have this debate over intellectual property, the protection of intellectual property, because there has been a proposal at the WTO put forward by India and South Africa to suspend intellectual property rights or the protection of intellectual property for vaccine and to declare the vaccines a public good. It's a very divisive debate. I mean, for one, Switzerland, but we're not the only one, believe that suspending intellectual property rights is not the right thing to do on many grounds. First of all, it will give a disastrous message to the research-based laboratory, private laboratories, because this will eliminate the incentive that they have to innovate, because clearly when they are investing at-risk capital, when they are starting to develop a vaccine, they don't know whether they're going to be successful, and in many instances it's not the case. So they need the promise of intellectual property protection to undertake this investment, because they will know that at the end of the day there will be some return on this, clearly. So this is one thing. But we need to answer the question, how do you ramp up production capacities? If you want to preserve the protection of intellectual property. And there are ways of doing this. And I think here a cooperation between the different agencies in Geneva, in particular the World Health Organization, with the medicine patent pool, for instance, with COVAX, with the accelerator, and also with what the WTO can contribute to this debate. And now we have a new Director General who is very, very knowledgeable of all this, because she's been heading Gavi, you know, and she's the perfect person to establish bridges between those forms of cooperation. One way of ramping up production capacities is precisely to do this in the context of what we call voluntary licenses, where the originator, the patent holder, will share technology with a producer, will share trade secrets, will teach the producer how to upgrade its production facilities, etc., which is extraordinarily complex, which takes time, and then can take place only in a climate of trust. And this trust is provided by the protection of intellectual property. And this is this effort that has to be stepped up in order to boost production. The name of the game now is how you scale up. And you have to do this orderly and cleverly.
Okay. Just one short, very short question to rebound on this. Isn't one of the problems of quick access to enough vaccines the fact that many countries ordered twice, 3 times more vaccines than they need actually for covering their own population, because they try to order very different vaccines? So shouldn't is that a regular situation, you guess?
I don't know, Ambassador Stephen, it seems that you had wanted to address that one.
Not really, but I think just taking a little bit of step back as an ambassador, if I would be a leader and I want to be sure that my population is vaccinated, I would order as many as possible. That is true, to be sure to have them. But if it's a wise policy, that's something else. But I agree with you that sometimes people think that it is the issue is not so easy, and everybody wants a quick answer. But of course, we all want a quick answer. We want to be vaccinated basically yesterday. But the production capacity is an issue indeed, and yeah, it's not so simple, and it's very difficult to explain that to the population and to people also in Africa. So I'm very happy that thanks to COVAX, at least there are some signs in the field that people are vaccinated also in Africa and in Asia. But indeed, we have to think about how we can maybe capacity, which is not always easy, because you have seen that the situation in which some of these vaccines, like minus 80 degrees, have to be conserved. Well, it's not so easy in some countries, of course, where the infrastructure is not all that developed. But that's only sort of a reflection on my side without entering into
I'm sorry for tossing the hot potato to you. So no, I mean, I would agree with Ambassador Stevens as well on that score. It's right, when you're purchasing vaccine, you know, you want to be on the safe side, you want to buy the best vaccine, you want to have enough doses, etc. But I think that we should not lose sight of the fact that there are channels to perhaps distribute the surplus that a number of countries will have, and this channel is definitely the COVAX. So I hope this will happen, and this will happen rather soon than late. But clearly, I mean, what we have to do is to increase production capacity. And the snag here is that this does not go like this. And you cannot just snap your fingers and see a factory coming out of the ground and manufacturing those high quality vaccine. I take the example of the Moderna vaccine, one of the most efficient, based on a revolutionary technology, which is a messenger RNA. It is being manufactured in Switzerland, in Valais. This is my home canton, by the way, by Lonza, you know. But Lonza started to work with Moderna in March last year, and they started to invest and to repurpose their plant already in March last year, and they have invested a lot of money to do this, also to train the people, you know. And in March last year, we didn't know whether the Moderna vaccine would function or not, but they've done this. And it took many months since they managed, you know, to set up a state-of-the-art plant that has been visited lately by Commissioner Breton, by the way. And it explains how difficult it is really to get there. There is a huge effort to be undertaken, and this is what we have to do now.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think we have to go forward because time is running out. Thank you for all these elements. I'd like the public that follows us on Zoom, those who want to ask a question, please raise your hand so we know a little bit how many questions they are. And in the meantime, I just give also the floor to Marie-Laure Salles. And I don't know what your reflections about what you just heard, but ironically, it seems that in the case of COVID, where the need of multilateralism, of common ground, of a global policy is the strongest, we have real problems to implement that. So what can be done? What's your view about that?
Thanks. So no, I think it's obviously it was a great discussion, very rich discussion, and it really is a great symbol of this. We are walking a line. We are walking a tight line between, on the one hand, the problems we're facing have never, as much as today, maybe called for as much collaboration, international collaboration as they do now. You know, we always say that today it's different, but I would still argue that you know, our big challenges call for definitely a lot of international collaboration and probably more than ever. And on the other hand, we've seen over the last few years increasing tendencies towards division, increasing tendencies towards return to sovereignties and different forms of sovereignties. You know, the latest figure that is interesting is the increase in sales of the arms in the arms industry by 12 to 13% over the last 2 years, and you know, the military expenditures are going up in all the big countries: the US, China, in Russia, which are undeniable signs of division, fear of each other, etc. I mean, and obviously the whole vaccine story has been an interesting example of that. I think obviously we are walking this line. We have to find the mechanisms that make us fall on the right side of the line, which is the collaboration side. And as I said before, we need to work at that on different levels. Where we are trying to work at that institute is also in trying to develop a new kind of culture for future decision makers or students who are going to join organizations. And this culture is this deep understanding that our own individual well-being will depend more than ever today from collective, the collective solving of global issues. And so I think that, you know, this is where we can contribute, hopefully. It's a longer term process because it takes a few years before those students come into organizations, but I think it's also a very important place to work on.
Thank you. I have still some 10, 15, 20 more questions for sure on this very interesting topic. And I perhaps will come to you after the question of Jamie Keaton from AP. Please ask your question.
Hello, Pierre. Vous m'entendez?
Oui, on vous entend.
Great. Nice to see you all. Thank you, ambassadors, for meeting with us. I had two questions. One I'd like to get really specific on the news if we can right now. And Mr. Chambovey, Ambassador Chambovey, you mentioned the need to ramp up production. I'd like to focus on the IP waiver issue a little bit more. You mentioned that ramping up production is the job number one right now. And you mentioned that that companies need to be able to guarantee that they will have a return on their investments when they innovate on things like vaccines. The difference in this case is that governments have put a lot of money into the development of vaccines. And that money has gone to Moderna, which has in turn gone to Lonza here in Switzerland. Same goes for Pfizer, same goes for AstraZeneca. So is there not a moment where you as ambassadors to the WTO should think more about not just the return on investment, but also the protection of lives, both in the poor countries, but also in rich countries like yours, where people are also dying, not simply in in the poor countries that the Director General of WTO has mentioned. So could you please address that?
Let's go for the first question, if you don't mind.
I have another one for the other two ambassadors.
Okay, we come back. Mr. Ambassador Chambovey, can you answer that?
No, first of all, I would like to underline that the only thing we have in mind is not the benefit of the profits of the big pharmaceutical companies. We would like to try to find solutions that are viable and that could deliver the quality that is needed. It's right that a lot of money went into the development of vaccine and into the funding production facilities through those pre-purchase orders. But those research capacities that have been boosted existed before those funds have been paid by the government. Let's take Moderna. They have been undertaking research on the messenger RNA for 15 years with at-risk investment before. And it's absolutely clear that this private funding would not have taken place if the protection of intellectual property had not been there to encourage the venture capitalists to go into this. Then, of course, this research has been repurposed. In the first place, the messenger RNA was not really devoted to a vaccine. It was devoted to other kind of diseases, but then it's been repurposed. And of course, there has been a lot of support from the states, but we cannot say that all the funding came from the state. A significant part of the funding came from the state, and it's clear that the state can impose conditions when it is so. Let's take AstraZeneca. They're selling their vaccine at cost, and it seems it's going to be the case of Johnson & Johnson because they receive a lot of money from governments. This is one thing that I had wanted to say just to underline the role of intellectual property protection.
Okay.
And the other thing, the other thing is now ramping up production. I mean, we believe there are already a number of efforts going on, a number of cooperation. For instance, AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute in India. The Serum Institute will produce the AstraZeneca vaccine massively, 1 billion doses this year. And this is taking place in the context of the voluntary license where the originator, AstraZeneca, is sharing its technology with the Serum Institute. But this is happening also under the protection, under the umbrella of intellectual property protection to create trust and to make sure that the generic producer will use this technology in a way that will not undermine the interest of the originator. And this is, and then you have this exchange of technology at the quality, at the safety that is needed to manufacture an extraordinarily complex molecule of biological medicine. And this is this kind of cooperation that we should seek and that should be boosted now. We have to make a huge effort to develop this kind of cooperation. That's the way we're looking at this. For us, intellectual property is an enabler of technology exchange and of orderly technology exchange rather than an obstacle to ramping up production.
Thank you, Mr. Chambovey. Does Mark Cassayre or Walter Stevens want to add something? Do you agree with Mr. Chambovey, or is it okay?
No, I leave it to. I already basically replied a little bit before to the same question.
Yeah, I have a question for both the EU ambassador and the Chargé d'Affaires that I'd like to focus on also. Next week, we're going to be getting the report on the China investigative, the report into the origins. And as I understand it, you ambassadors have a meeting with WHO in the next coming days that maybe this will come up. How, you mentioned that China has filled the void at the Human Rights Council. It's also filled a void in the WHO. It's very important that this report is able to be as transparent as possible for future judging of how the world responds to pandemics. So my question, what are you going to be asking, both Mr. Cassayre and Mr. Stevens, what are you going to be asking of the WHO to ensure that, that this report is as transparent as possible and that China is not going to have its hands manipulating the final report or somehow trying to tweak the final report to make it softer and make it more favorable to Beijing?
Who wants to start, Mr. Cassayre?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Good to see you, and thanks for the question. You know, I think I touched on this a little earlier in my earlier comments. It is absolutely critical that we do see transparency from countries, and in this case, China, to ensure that when the report comes out, we have a report that is reflective of full transparency, all the data that was requested, access to the individuals that were that the expert team needed to meet with and discuss with, and those are critical points. We're going to look very closely at the report when it comes out, and we have been, as you heard me say earlier, been calling for this kind of transparency and clear data sharing, because it is absolutely critical, and that's a conversation that will continue going. And I think we'll also be looking forward to the reform efforts at the WHO to ensure that there are more effective ways going forward to address this kind of need, so that when the next pandemic or the next outbreak occurs, we have a much more confidence that we're able to address it swiftly and to prevent it from spreading worldwide. So we have been asking those questions. We will continue to do so. And as I said before, our hope is that China will provide that kind of access and data. Thus far, we unfortunately have not seen that, and we'll continue to seek that.
Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I would just like to join what Mark has said, and we are in very close contact on this. I mean, we're pressing to have this report out as quickly as possible. Secondly, that is completely transparent, and that it also answers the questions that we all have. Have a little bit of fear that this was maybe not so much the case, or at least only partly. Again, it's also a wider question, the leverage that WHO has on countries who hide behind their national sovereignty, and that the negotiations that they have to do in order to have access to whenever a pandemic is kind of looming somewhere. Now it's China, could be some countries, other countries later. So there is a wider issue that we also try to address in this resolution that we are putting forward, to make sure that WHO and those that are needing have access to the situation on the ground, and can also draw conclusions to avoid further developments in that regard. So I can only underscore and fully support what Mark has said, and we will continue pressing WHO and also the member states, because basically the WHO is in the hands of the member states. And I don't fully agree also with what you said, Jamie, that China is taking over WHO. I think they are a little bit under pressure. They are, for example, not investing so much in the multilateral approach. But of course, they are very much on the spotlight because of the pandemic having developed in Wuhan, in China. And they make, of course, life not always easy.
Thank you very much. So if there are no other questions, if you have 2 more minutes, really 2 more minutes, I would like to wrap up this session with a very easy and complicated question at the same time concerning Geneva. In 2050, because 2050 is one of these big picture horizon, how do you think the international Geneva will be? Will it be, as today, stable? Will it be growing? Will it be shrinking? Can you very shortly answer those questions? Just to guess, I mean. Perhaps let's start with you, Walter Stevens, if you are good.
Why always with me?
Okay,
no, but okay, I can answer. Let me say that I really hope, and the European Union is going to work for that in 2050 we have a truly multilateral approach, and that Geneva, as the capital of the multilateral approach, next to New York, is really the center of that. And I think we have in Geneva here the organizations that are key for the future, because we have all seen that health issues are key, that also technology and digital issues are key, that also more and more we see people that are linked with humanitarian issues because of climate, because of conflict, all here in Geneva, not to speak about, of course, WTO, about WIPO. So I really hope, and the European Union will work for that multilateral approach and for the place of Geneva in that regard. There is indeed a little bit of paradox that we need strong multilateralism because we have global problems that we need to address, and only a multilaterally and cooperative approach we can do this. On the other hand, we see also a growing polarization and countries that hide behind national interest, behind national sovereignty. We will fight back, we will team up, and that's also why it's very much welcome that the United States is now back. We will team up with the United States, we will team up with like-minded countries, and we will try to convince Latin American countries, African countries, Asian countries that this is important and that we have to defend a multilateral rules-based system that is in the interest of all of us.
Thank you for this optimistic, very optimistic and positive message. Marc Cassayre?
Thank you. The world, as we say, is getting increasingly small, yet we have an increasing number of collective and shared challenges that we have to address. And Geneva is a place where we address those collective challenges. I don't see the number of problems and challenges we have in front of us decreasing. And I think that from that perspective, we need Geneva. We need to have the organizations working effectively. And that's one of the things we didn't touch on in great depth, but I do think it's worth underscoring. You've seen the relationship that the United States has had over time with multilateral organizations. And one theme that commonly runs through that is that the organizations need to be able to deliver on their promise, and they need to do so efficiently and effectively. If Geneva and the organizations that are here are able to deliver efficiently and effectively, demonstrate an openness to constantly innovate, to renew, reform, improve, everything from internal justice mechanisms to the outward-facing policies they adopt. If it's able to do that over time, Geneva can continue to remain that center of discussion and in multilateralism that it is today. And I think its role will continue to be equally, if not more important, as we as a world try to collectively solve the really difficult problems that we share.
Thank you. Marie-Laure Salles?
Yes, I think, 2050 is really far away, huh? But my guess is that Geneva is going to become more important than ever, that probably the multilateralism that we know today will be very different then. And I would just like to underscore actually three things. One is the need probably for much more inter-organizational collaboration, and this has been mentioned by a number of you already. It's happening already, but probably needs to happen on a much bigger scale in the sense of the closer tightening of issues with each other. And I think that there are two issues where Geneva has probably a bigger role to play than it does today. And its neutrality in the sense of positive and proactive neutrality here is really important. One is finance for impact, finance for sustainable development. And I'm just pointing to this initiative, Building Bridges, which will happen again next year in part at the Institute, bringing together international organization actors in both sense of the term and finance. And I think that this is really where Geneva has an important role to play in the coming years. And the other one is probably technology governance, where obviously in a very polarized world where we have in a sense a bit two perspectives on that, somewhere in the middle, Geneva and maybe Geneva with Europe might be actually the place to actually move forward with the agenda of technological governance, which I think is going to be one of the major agendas in the coming years. So yes, I see a very positive, bright future for international Geneva, but reinvented.
Thank you for the thoughts. And we wrap up with Ambassador Chambovey.
I very much concur with what the other speakers said. I would like to add, global problems require a global solution. And it's clear that's the multilateral approach that is providing the best solutions at the scale, at the necessary scale. And I see Geneva as an ecosystem with all the specialized agencies that would provide these answers, that would provide a platform for cooperating efficiently among states. What is important, and I hope this will further develop, is the establishment of bridges between the different forms of cooperation here in Geneva. We've seen in the debate today how important it is that we deal with health issue together with the trade community on the one hand, and also with the WHO and all other organizations that are hinging around the WHO. This kind of cooperation should be fostered. It might perhaps be institutionalized to create a vibrant ecosystem here in Geneva. This will be the rational approach, that where the international community is able to conceive global response to global problem. But we should not lose sight of the fact that multilateralism is not always easy, that multilateralism requires a lot of efforts from all stakeholders, and that recently we have not made tremendous headways in the multilateral way. I hope this is going to change, and I very much hope that by 2050, we will be able to work rationally and to create this multilateral ecosystem in Geneva that is vibrant and responsive.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Chambovey. Thank you, Chargé d'Affaires Marc Cassayre. Thank you, Ambassador Walter Stevens, and thank you very much also to Marie-Laure Salles, Director of the Graduate Institute. It was in my views a very interesting, very rich conversation about the rebound of multilateralism, about the perspective of today's problems on the impact they have on the organizations of today, and also what can come out in very different sectors of the comeback of the United States in this international spectrum. I really thank you for this, and I appreciated very much your inputs, and I hope to have you again here at the Geneva Press Club. I hope you can make it in real next time, and you're always welcome at the club, and have a good day to all of you, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.